Welcome to Tell Me Your Story, New Paradigms for a New World. I'm Richard Dugan, your host, and it is always a pleasure to have you join us for these conversations. And this is part two, shall we say, of our conversation with our very special guest, who is providing us with an opportunity to dive into something that some folks, they're a little concerned about your mentality if you go down this road. Well, Brit Elders has been involved with this subject for, way over 40 years. Both she and, am I correct, your husband?
Yes.
It's good to have you back again. And of course, we're talking about, in this case, it is the, if I'm correct, the 45th anniversary release of a pretty good size, well-produced, we'll call it a coffee table book,
Right.
having to do with, and the title is, of course, Contact with the Pleiades.
Right. UFO
And
Contact from the Pleiades.
from the
Yes.
Pleiades, yeah, and UFO Contact. And I watched the documentary. I
Right.
actually had to, yeah, I
You
had to
got
watch.
the first sneak peek.
Oh, wow. Well, I
Yeah.
feel honored and privileged. I had to watch it in segments and then back it up and that kind of thing to kind of piece the last segment that I watched with the next segment,
Uh-huh.
just because of time constraints on my end. And I found it fascinating as, first of all, as far as the research
Mhm.
and the investigation and the processing of what we will, of course, what was referred to, of course, as the evidence, which we'll get into as well. But I was also fascinated by the personal story
Mhm.
of the focus, if you will, of the documentary. Yes, it was the UFO contact with the Pleiades, but it was also with the gentleman in, if I'm remembering correctly, Sweden?
Switzerland.
Switzerland.
Yes.
That's right. The neutrals country. Switzerland. And the process that he was going through as this documentary went on over the course of how many months or years did this documentary cover?
It covered 7 years
7 years.
of our investigation. Right.
And how his perspective, his feelings, his family's demeanor and so forth changed over the course of that time throughout the documentary, where at one point, and we'll get to this as well, he said, I'm done. I can't do this anymore.
Yeah.
And I felt for him, but I also felt for the gentleman who was sitting there talking with him saying, look, we've invested a lot of time and energy into this and money into this thing, and we really need you to, and he didn't say continue. He says, we really need you to give it some thought.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. He tried not to put the pressure on, but he put the pressure on.
Right.
And of course, there was the continuation. So let's, first of all, let's talk about, because extraterrestrials, in this case, the proof of the existence. We know that the Pleiades, the star system, I guess it is,
Right.
it exists because you can see it through a telescope.
Right.
And it is light years away, which means the light that we are seeing is thousands or millions of years old, something like that.
It's 500 light years from us. Yes.
Okay. So that would make the light that we would see, let's say on a day like today, what we have, I'm sure that it's been calculated at how old that light would be now that it's reached us.
Yeah, I have no idea, but it
Okay.
would be old. Yes.
Because I know that the light from the sun is 8 minutes old,
Mm-hmm.
a minimum of 8 minutes old. Okay. So let's set that aside. And now we're talking about the Pleiadians who have traveled here. You said 5 light years.
Right. 500.
500, I beg your pardon, 500
Yes.
light years. And they're here, and we'll talk about for what purpose. And this gentleman saw them.
Yes.
First of all, through your investigation, was that their intent to be discovered, or were they trying to do it a little more surreptitiously, a little more
No.
incognito?
It was intentional.
Okay.
They actually selected Meier. They studied him for 5 to 10 years, determining whether or not his energy would be coherent with theirs. And they decided it was. They initiated the contact in January of 1975, and it was a face-to-face contact. They told him part of their purpose was to bring evidence to support the fact that we are not the only thinking beings in the universe. So that was a big message. They gave him photographs, movie footage, audio recordings of the craft, and metal samples. And those were the basis of the physical evidence that was analyzed all around the planet. We took them into laboratories in Europe, in Asia, the United States, of course, even into Mexico, doing some things with different groups that were really specifically oriented to a very specific item. Photogrammetric, it went to Dr. Michael Malin down at U of A. It went to Jim Delatoso, who had done a lot of work into photogrammetric analysis. It went to Robert Post at JPL, Eric Eliason at USGS. When we got to the metal, it went to IBM. The gentleman there, Dr. Marcel Vogel, brought in 42 other scientists to work with him because he couldn't explain the metal. With all of this evidence, no one has been able to duplicate it, and no one could tell us this is hoaxed. They could say, we don't know what it is. We don't know if it's a UFO or what it is, but it is something we cannot duplicate.
By the way, as as someone who is very much involved in sound and so forth. Now, I've never gone quite to the depths to try to analyze something per se, to find out where, where it comes from, what are those real sounds, let alone the software that I know exists today, to mask out certain sounds, to identify different sounds that exist in the audio, and sometimes even filter it out in order to hear what else is there.
Right.
And it seems as though, from what I was watching in the documentary, with the technology that was available in the 70s, which still was computerized, but again, you're talking about enormous computers,
Right.
was still able to analyze the sound specifically. We'll get into the images later. And they were actually able to, what was it? I hope I'm thinking of the same video as far as the documentary, where they were able to hear sounds like there was an animal in the background and they identified that. And there was this, and then there was this, and then there was this, and then there was this that they couldn't really identify. So they concluded, well, that's got to be the sound of the ship.
Right.
And then they went to great lengths looking at the sound. I think it was in an oscilloscope.
Yes, it was. Yes.
That
Tearing
was
it apart.
that was amazing to me, the depths that they went to.
Right. What had happened originally, we took it to a gentleman by the name of Rob Shellman, who worked at the Groton facility, naval facility, where they store sounds from all over the world. He could not identify the sound in any of their storage banks, but we did hear a dog barking in the background. We heard a car. We heard a police siren. And in one particular case, we actually heard a plane flying at the same time. Rob then, he felt he had gone as far as he could. We took it to Nils Ragnerud and to Steve Ambrose in California, both audio engineers. And they tore it apart. And they said, the interesting thing about the sound was it was creating all these various frequencies, and then they would all merge back together. And in the process of that, they were hitting the Schumann resonance, the field of the earth. And they thought that was fascinating. They took it apart as far as they possibly could with the equipment that was available in the day, and they all agreed there is no way we can duplicate this. And we're not sure what its purpose is, unless the purpose is something regarding propulsion.
That is, again, I've been amazed by a lot of things over the years. That was probably one of the most incredible. And I have a feature, of course, in the software that I use for editing sound, where I can shift between the wave form
Uh-huh.
And I think it's a spectral form, a frequency spectrum, where I could select using primarily like a square or a rectangle and stretching it across. I could actually remove, because the frequencies are colored in the
Right.
software. I could actually remove those frequencies. I've never really played around with it because I've never had a real practical use for doing that, but
Uh-huh.
that's kind of what they were doing.
Yeah. They
And
they were doing their best with what they had. Yes.
yeah, my philosophy has always been you work with what you had till you get what you want, you
Exactly.
know, and they had to wait about 20 or 30 years in one sense. I'm curious, has the same evidence ever been reprocessed using our present day, or at least maybe the early 21st century technologies?
No, it hasn't. And there's a reason behind that. We had to look at what we had available at that time. And we were in prime laboratories all around the world. I mean, they had state-of-the-art equipment. We were using scanning electron microscopes, the best that was available all the way from the scientists to the equipment. We haven't tested it after that because we were trying to keep it on a level playing field. We knew Meier didn't have the capabilities because personal computers weren't around then, and Meier certainly didn't have one. We didn't have phones that took great pictures, both still and moving. He had an old 35 millimeter camera and he had a movie footage camera. That was what he had to work with. So that's what we tested and analyzed. And the same with the metal. But all of this, we decided use what we have then in all realms to try to duplicate what Meyer had, and we couldn't.
Hmm.
Today, I'm sure we could. We have Photoshop programs. We have amazing AI programs that can play in audio and things like that, as well as imagery. So today, I think we could duplicate all of this. But looking back 45 years, no.
Yeah, there was no George Lucas. Oh, well, I take that back. He did
There
do
was
Star
a
Wars in the
George
70s,
Lucas, but yeah.
but he wasn't doing stuff like this.
Right.
I was actually fascinated by the processes he went through in terms of creating some of the images that he did. For example, I don't know if, well, you probably do know this, that the blowing up of the Death Star, or the Death Star explosion,
Hmm.
I did not know this at the time, but I saw a documentary on this where the cameras were placed, I want to say, underneath it,
Wow.
so that when it exploded, it went out in 360 degrees from the position of the camera,
Uh-huh.
and it made it look much more real than if you were to shoot it horizontally,
Or straight on, yeah.
because then everything falls down. It's like, wait a minute, that can't happen. That doesn't happen in space.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
mean, it takes a pretty good brain to remember, okay, we got to, although I still have to wonder sometimes about some of the flames that exist in that you see in some of these movies
Yeah.
in space. Um, I'm curious as to whether the Pleiadians, from Meier's experience, or
Hmm.
put it that way, um, were they humanoid?
Yes.
Okay.
They look very much like us. They were rather tall, fair-skinned, blue-eyed for the most part. Sumyasa, his first contact, was blue-eyed, had long blonde hair, and was female because she told him that men on our planet react more comfortably when they're approached by a woman. So that's why they used a female for the first contacts.
Sunyasa, is that correct?
Sim Simyasa.
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 Um, is the spokesperson, shall we say?
She's one of them. She was the original contact, and she would sit face to face with Meier and have a conversation. And that happened, oh God, hundreds of times over the period of years.
Hmm. How much? I'm curious also as to how much footage did he gather over the period of time that he was taking images, taking both stills as well as a film,
Movie
correct?
footage. Yes. Yeah. The stills, he took hundreds of photographs, literally, and they're quite amazing. I mean, my very favorite is the one, there's two. There's a tree branch, and behind the tree branch, you can see three craft. But one of the craft is actually behind a branch. I mean, the branch crosses right in front of it. It's perfect for using in a photogrammetric analysis because we know how big the branch was. We can then triangulate and determine how big the craft was, which was 21 feet in diameter. So things like that we look for. There's another one that is wonderful that has a Mirage jet fighter, and it's in the same scene as this beam ship, this UFO hovering. And then I know you saw in the video the footage where the craft was hovering and cars are going underneath it on the road. Things like that are what you look for because you have known objects and unknown objects. And you can do a lot of work when you're figuring out distances, size, and spatial distance as well. One of the things that was so great about the movie footage clips that he took, and he had several, we had them analyzed, and they were 8 mm. So when we have a craft up here at the top of the screen, and then think it's down here in the bottom, there's no splicing of that 8 mm.
Mm-hmm.
And you would be able to tell that. So different things like that were fascinating to us as we got into the photogrammetric analysis.
I can only imagine because you're sort of looking for certain telltale signs.
Yeah.
I joke about this. I don't know how serious some people would take this. I hope not too serious. Nixon would have made it to the end of his second term if he'd had me as his editor. I would have taken out that 18 minutes gap there. Okay.
Right. Without the clicks.
Without the clicks. Exactly.
Yeah.
The joke made by the musician, I can't remember his name now, but he did the song Alice's Restaurant.
Oh yeah,
He
Arlo
says
Guthrie.
that Alice's Restaurant is exactly the same length as the silent space in Nixon's tape, which implies he was a closet Arlo Guthrie. That's his name.
Yeah.
Arlo Guthrie fan. But that can't be proven.
They should have just inserted, Alice's Restaurant into that missing segment.
Perfect. Let me ask you in regards to all of this, and first of all, congratulations for putting out the 45th anniversary. I don't know that you expect to do this at the 50th or years down the road per se. Why is this important for us to know about?
Yeah. It is important. In fact, I think it's more relevant today than it was. Several reasons. We are at a crossroads for the world. We are so angry with each other. Doesn't matter if it's in this country or we're angry with another country. Everybody's angry with everybody. One of the things the Pleiadians really stressed with Meier is that we have to grow up and develop as humans. We have to find our center. We've got to stop fighting each other. We have to get to a position where we respect each other before we can get into space. And we're looking at right now sending probes to Mars, eventually sending a crew to Mars, and going further into the universe. If we can't respect each other and work with each other, how are we going to handle all of the other civilizations that exist out there? So that's a big reason. Another reason is there's a whole new generation of people that have very open minds, that haven't been told to, close your ears, close your eyes. This doesn't exist. It's not real. And anybody that thinks this does is crazy. Now the governments are coming out. People are more interested in discussing experiences they've had than they ever have been before. And the great thing is I'm getting letters and just wonderful response from kids. from teenagers, from young adults that have seen the book and are just, it gives them hope. It gives them a sense of we can be better and we can progress into the future, but we have to want to. And that's what they're looking at. And I love that fact. You know, when we first brought the book out in 1978, people did not want to talk about their experiences. They did not want to say, oh, I had a sighting or I had an encounter. It was something that it took a lot of courage to step forward. People like Billy, people like Travis Walton, even Betty and Barney Hill going back a little further, it took a lot for them to come out publicly and say anything because UFOs, it was still a taboo subject.
Mm.
And it's lost that now. So now let's look at what we can learn from not just Billy's case, but all of the things going on. And there are so many things that we can help ourselves grow and mature and develop as humans with. I think that's very, very important. And that's why we brought the book back out for the 45th anniversary edition. And that's why we're bringing the documentary out the end of this month, May. And it's the same title, UFO Contact from the Pleiades, a documentary film.
Well, I myself am certainly, and I think I shared this the last time we were together. I just find it the height of arrogance of the human being to assume, and I say assume, that we are alone in the universe.
Yeah,
I mean, even if you're a person of faith, you can't believe that
yeah,
because you believe in a supreme being. And if you do, we're not alone. I mean, at the very
right.
least, at least we have that, right?
Well,
So,
when you go to the Bible, and in the Bible it says, and God created many mansions.
mhm,
Well, that means our little mansion here isn't the only one. So we need to be a little more open and receptive to
mhm.
what else is out there. I'm not saying be receptive to everything, but at
Sure.
least try to have an open mind.
Yeah, I'm not into some of the people who like to push conspiracy theories. I'm not of
Yeah,
that ilk. But at the same time, I really have a hard time believing uh, that this is all there is. You know, like that
absolutely.
song, I guess it was from the 60s. Is that all there is? Yes, that's all there is. There is no more. And it's only been around for 6,000 years, which it's like,
Uh-uh.
I can't accept that
A whole
considering,
lot older, yes.
oh yeah. I mean, at least a couple of years older, you know?
I like to tell people that are so determined that we are the only ones, go out and look at the heavens
Mhm.
on a clear night in a place where there's no city lights. Look at the stars and just tell me that there's not another planet out there that could support life. Because if you really believe that, then you really have a lot of educating to do
Yeah.
from a personal level. Yeah,
Yeah. It's, and I'm not going to belittle anybody who holds
right.
that particular view. But I think I would say the same as you in that regard. And I happen to co-host a program called Skyview on this station
Hmm.
with a gentleman by the name of Steve Cates, Dr. Sky.
Uh-huh.
And I told him I was doing this interview. He says, "Really?" I said, "Yeah." And we talk about his realms of astronomy, space, aviation, and weather, which certainly covers a lot of this. And if we were the only ones in the universe, and this includes the microscopic living
Absolutely.
things, then why would, in this case, the Apollo program
Yes.
go to such lengths to sequester the astronauts after their visit to the moon?
Very true.
Because they were afraid of possible contamination by what?
Hmm.
Microbes and so on and so forth. So,
Yeah.
and how do we know? I mean, that takes me back to Dr. Seuss, Horton Hears a Who. How do we know that those microbes, and I said this about, for example, the coronavirus, the actual cells and so forth, how do we know that's not an intelligent being? Has anybody
True.
tried to communicate with it?
That's
You
really
know,
true.
all we're trying
And
to do
we
is
have,
kill it.
Richard, we have a difficult time communicating with each other.
Well, there you go. There you
So, you know,
go. Brit Elders is my guest, and we are talking about UFO Contact with the Pleiades. That's the 45th anniversary, both book and documentary that will be available later this month. And I remember when I got the email about this, a couple of months ago, I think,
mm,
and I thought, okay, I guess the universe is telling me this is a subject I've got to talk about because others are. And it's not, I'm not trying to scoop anybody. That's not the purpose of this program, to scoop anybody. It's about having a dialogue, having a
right.
conversation about these concepts, these topics and so forth. Because there are even those who, what was it? My wife says she was reading something that said that 60%, it is said that there 60% of the humans on the planet today, and we
Mm.
have 8.1 billion and growing, 60% of them are aliens. They are not of this earth, but you probably couldn't tell.
That's
Uh, and I don't know. Maybe,
yeah.
who knows? Maybe you are, maybe I am, and we just don't know yet. But there are also those who say, and I've heard this, and I tend to agree, that we aren't even indigenous to the earth.
I believe that.
Did
I
Myers,
think the planet was seeded, yes.
yeah, did Myers get information like that from the Pleiadians? Were those questions he brought up at all?
Yes, in fact, they told him that our forefathers are their forefathers.
Mm-hmm.
They had been to this planet centuries and millennia ago, and they had helped seed the planet along with other cultures. But they say we're all related. So they have a tendency to look at us as their little brothers and sisters. And they want to make certain that we don't go too far astray. We
Mm-hmm.
have to learn our own lessons.
Right.
That's something that's very important. We create the problem, we need to fix the problem. But they want to make certain that we don't go create a massive problem that we can't come back from. Part of the reason for that is they originated in the star cluster that we call Lyra. They had wars among their population. They ended up blowing up their planet. The difference was this: they had the ability to escape. They had the ability to go to the Pleiades, to the Hyades, and to some other places, and actually engineer a planet so they could survive there. We don't have that capability. I mean, we are so far off from being able to leave our world en masse in an exodus to a new planet and then engineer it. So they're very concerned that we really need to get our act together here and start learning from each other, respecting each other, moving forward with curiosity, questions, and going in that direction rather than fighting all the time.
Well, it has been said quite astutely, there is there is no planet B.
That's right.
And yet we have people, I think one of them is Elon Musk in particular in this country, who basically wants to colonize Mars.
Sure.
And I'm sitting here thinking, okay, well, we haven't learned the lessons yet about taking care of this planet, and you want to go somewhere else.
And do we want to drag all of our bad luggage with us
Oh,
as we go into space?
uh-huh.
No, we don't need to pollute them anymore. Mm-mm.
No, no, you're absolutely right. It's very interesting how all of this has transpired, how it's come about over the years. But this is nothing new because even our ancient wisdom teachings may
Yeah.
not speak specifically of the Pleiades, but certainly does speak of um, other beings.
Yes. And many of them do speak specifically to the Pleiades and say that the Pleiadians, the beings from the star system, came in and brought them some form of knowledge. They also say that about other civilizations out there as well. Those from Aldebaran, those from Arcturus, Sirius A and B, those are star systems. They're mentioned throughout history as being bringers of some type of knowledge.
Now, I want to take this to another level if we can.
Sure.
I want to ask you about if this conversation was ever held. And again, I don't know what the philosophical uh, underpinnings, if you will, of Switzerland are
Uh-huh.
and its people. I myself, I was born and raised Catholic, but was given the freedom at the age of 16 to discontinue going to mass.
Hmm.
But I never turned my back on it. That was the reason my mother did that. She says, "No, you don't have to go," because she didn't want me to turn away from or reject, which I never have. I'm not practicing anymore, but I have
Right.
over the years become what I like to call a metaphysician.
Uh-huh.
I like to study that which is beyond the physical.
Yes.
I'm curious about both Meier's philosophy, his family, his country of origin, obviously, but also the Pleiadian philosophy that they live by.
Hmm.
I'd be hard pressed to believe that Pleiadians are Christian.
No, sir, they're not. Let's start with Switzerland.
Sure.
It is quite the dogmatic country. I remember we were staying in a guest house on the first trip over there. And every morning before school, these kids were brought to a graveyard to do whatever they did every morning, pray before the graves of their relatives before they'd go to school. And then after school, you'd see the same little parade of these kids going through that. Billy himself is not religious. He takes basically the same beliefs as the Pleiadians. They believe in creation, and creation exists in everything. It's not just as we would call it God, because we think of that as the deity of being that we've personified and made into something we can relate to.
Hmm.
But creation is in all things. You're a part of it. I'm a part of it. Every tree, flower, insect, bug, animal, all flora, fauna, everything is a part of it. And for them, that means you have to learn to appreciate, be thankful for, and to respect.
Mm.
All of that is. So it's a different type of thing. It's not, it's a philosophy more than some people would call it a religion or a cult or anything like that. But it's not. It's a philosophy of life. And it makes perfect sense to me. I'm Cherokee, Choctaw, Indian, and Danish. And I get the concept of creation because that's the same thoughts that they have. The creation exists in all things.
I just am intrigued to no end by the different perspectives people all have on the present life on a
Right.
spiritual level.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm also curious too as to the perspective of one's view of the afterlife. What happens when the physical body uh, ceases to function? And it has an expiration date. We just don't know what it is. You
Right.
know?
The Pleiadians do believe in reincarnation. They say that's one of the reasons they knew about Billy was because they could recognize his incarnation pattern as having been associated with them in the past. So that incarnation pattern, like we think of DNA in the terms of physical, they think of frequency in the terms of, for lack of better wording, spirit. So they recognized the frequency of Billy, and that's what made them comfortable in selecting him to be the contactee, to bring out all of this information.
Hmm. What about the family? Wife and what was it? Was it three kids?
Three kids, yeah.
Uh,
He's had to. couple more since.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he is divorced from his first wife. There was a big falling out there. His wife was fiery Greek, I think is the best way to explain her. And she got pretty tired of people wandering around and wandering through her house and her home and her garden and taking up her husband's time.
Mm,
The interesting thing about her, and it's best to just put this out there now, she is on camera saying that she has seen the craft. She's been present when Billy came out of a contact and walked from the forest in a pouring rain, and he was dry. But he came walking out and said, I just had a contact. The kids have drawn pictures of the craft that they saw when they were young. After the divorce, Calliope, Billy's first wife, came out and said, this is not real. I don't believe any of it. It's all fake. Well, as a human, I can understand why she would do that. Her world had been turned upside down. So I get that.
hmm
But I have her on camera saying all of these other things in great description as to what she had experienced, what she saw, and what she felt. In the documentary, you can kind of see her in that thing in the kitchen where she's rolling out the bread and everything. She was irritated that all of this was going on. There was just so much happening. But Billy has since remarried. He married Ava. She's a wonderful lady. I've known her for years and years. They have a daughter. His oldest son, Atlantis, lives there at the farm and is sort of stepping into Billy's footsteps, taking care of the farm and making certain things get done so that Billy, as he ages, is a little more comfortable.
Hmm. Well, that's rather remarkable in that respect. I mean, and again, I can appreciate the woman's frustration. I mean, I don't know
Sure.
how I would feel if something like that happened, regardless of the subject matter, when people were, wanting to come by all the time, day and night,
Day and night, yes.
and their whole life has just been turned upside down. I mean, there is no return to quote unquote normalcy.
True.
You now have to find whatever you want to consider to be the new normal, you
Yeah.
know, whatever that is.
Yeah, it was rough. And we saw it. I mean, we saw people come in at mid 3 o'clock in the morning and demand to talk to Billy. It was just
Wow.
because we were living at the farm after our first trip over. We stayed at the farm with Billy. So for a period of 7 years, we were there 365 days plus,
Wow.
living right next to the house. We saw what they went through.
Hmm.
We saw the literal hordes come in. Every time a newspaper article would drop somewhere in Europe, people would just, they were coming from everywhere. And it was really rough on the whole family. It was rough on everybody there. Even Jacobus, who worked on the farm, he really wanted nothing to do with these people. He'd go off and take care of a cow or, hoe a garden or something. He really did not want to be that involved. So I felt for them. I mean, to have your whole life turned upside down like that, and half of them wanting to put you on a pedestal,
Yeah.
and the other half wanting to
Burn you at the
assassinate
stake.
you.
Yeah,
Yeah,
burn you at the stake.
exactly.
Yeah. Um, how did you feel? I mean, first of all, there was one image that I saw in the entire documentary that just, I'm going, that does not belong in this documentary. Now,
What was it?
it was at twilight,
Uh-huh.
and it was the silhouette of a man with a rifle over his shoulder. And of course, the conversation, the documentary, the narrator was basically speaking about how security had been increased and so forth. And I'm thinking, I've seen his place in the daylight. It's beautiful. It's peaceful. It's wonderful. And you got this guy walking around at night with a shotgun. And that it's like the dichotomy of
It
that.
was because it is a dichotomy, and Billy is a dichotomy. He's this wonderful earthy guy. I mean, he's just so grounded and so together. yet he's having these fabulous experiences. But the reason for the security was that there had been numerous attempts on Billy's life. We were there when some of these happened. Wendell Stevens was sitting right next to him when a bullet was right by his ear and hit the barn door.
Oh,
So, yeah, we saw that. And at that point, the people that were living there in the area said, you got to do something because somebody's going to get hurt. And so Billy had a couple of his friends prowling the grounds with guns. And that was the only way that the family felt safe. And that's awful.
Brit Elders is my guest. BritElders.com is the link we will be connected to. We'll link to that on our not on the SoundCloud as well as YouTube sites so that you can find out more about the 45th anniversary of UFO Contact with the Pleiades. Both the book, wonderful, well-produced book and documentary.
Thank you.
I mean, I swear to God, it's like nothing has been changed in the documentary as far as somehow adjusting for a current day
Right.
technology.
No,
And the machines, the computers, the oscilloscope, all of the other pieces of equipment in the labs and so forth, were just it's like these must be museums now. These
it's a
places must
time
be
warp.
museums.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Hey, I have worked for radio stations. Matter of fact, the current station that I currently work for, I've been with for 18 years now. We have actually discussed jokingly about opening up the station as a museum. And I was talking with someone who we were discussing primarily AM and FM radio and the radio station equipment.
Yeah.
And there are very, very few that don't have equipment that is 20th century, late 20th century. Not quite tubes, okay, but darn close to it. And
Yeah, I remember those. That
oh,
dates me.
I have to tell you one of the things, one of the experiences I had in terms of that, I was taken the very first chief engineer. And I still remember his name too. Short little, at least he seemed short to me. His name was Everett Fruitman. Great guy. He was just the nicest guy. Most of the engineers I've worked with have just been fantastic. And he wanted to take me up to the equivalent of wherever you live nowadays, Broadcast Peak. It was South
Mhm.
Mountain, south of
Yeah,
Phoenix. Well, yeah, you and your husband lived in Phoenix. That's my
yeah,
hometown.
exactly.
Talked about
Yeah.
that before. Oh, so he took me up to South Mountain, primarily covered with television towers and transmitters, but there were some radio stations. And he took me inside one of the buildings, and there was this big giant sheet of plexiglass with all kinds of symmetrically placed holes in it to vent the heat that was generated by vacuum tubes.
Vacuum tubes, yes.
Okay. And he went across the room. He picked up I think it was a 3 or 4 foot fluorescent bulb from a
Uh-huh.
pile, and he put it up against the plexiglass and it glowed. He says that is how much energy
Uh-huh.
is flowing through. It's not from the heat, is flowing through this building. Well, in my second job in broadcasting, what I was at for 15 years, I worked at the transmitter site. We
Oh,
had one solid state Harris transmitter, 1,000 watts, and a 250 watt Gates vacuum tube backup transmitter.
wow.
And the only plus with that was in the wintertime, at least, if you had to turn that on, at least you could warm your hands. The signal didn't go very far, but at least you stayed warm. It's just
Yeah,
amazing how far we have come in what
it
seems like
is.
a very short time.
It truly is.
In
Hmm.
terms of, now I want to ask this about the process, the documentary process.
Yeah.
Now, if you're covering an event, all right, My understand that there's sort of, I don't know if it's written or unwritten code or what have you, that you do not want to become a part of the event because you're there to observe. You're there to document what's happening. But the unsung, I want to call them unsung heroes of documentaries, are the cameramen and women.
Yeah.
Especially if you're doing a documentary deep underwater or
Yeah.
high on top of a mountain. I mean, these individuals,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know whether they disconnect their brain or they're not afraid of heights or depths or what have you. Tell me about the crew that provided you with the sound and images that
Uh,
have turned into this documentary.
yeah, Paul Desatoff was our cameraman. He was great.
And you only had one.
I only had one, and
Wow.
he followed us all over the place and would climb up on ladders or get up, up high on top of a cabinet somewhere so he could film down in some instances. Very creative man, but we wanted it to be as real as possible
Mhm.
because this is what we did with Meier. This is how we explored. This is how we met him. This is the evidence he gave us, all of that. So Paul just sort of he took over everything and would catch us on all these different levels of different things we were doing. Kenny was our sound man, and he was this tall, skinny guy, and he had these Nagra systems, audio systems hanging all over him, and all these different mics. And oh man, it was really something. So yeah, we had a very small crew. Larry Savidoff was the director. Larry used to direct oh, I can't remember the name of the program, but it had Leonard Nimoy in it, and it was all about ancient things. And
Oh, yes, yes, yes. I
okay,
remember it. I don't remember the title like you, but I
yeah,
remember the series. Yeah.
Larry was very involved with that. He was there. He'd step in if Paul needed help or Kenny needed help, but Larry was great. So it was just basically Larry and Kenny and Paul, and then us. We were there with Billy and his family. Yeah,
You are the CEO of ShirleyMacLaine.com,
I am.
which is more than just a website.
Yeah.
But you are continuing to research as well in terms of this subject of, and I'm going to stick with the vernacular that I grew up with, UFOs, unidentified flying objects.
I'm comfortable with that too.
Yeah.
I don't
I
know
don't
why
know
they
why.
changed names,
Uh,
but yeah.
yeah. Are you perplexed by the position that our government is taking, acknowledging UFOs and also trying to inflict the fear of God into the nation by saying that, and we have a national emergency
Yeah,
because we don't know if they are here for good or evil or for peace or war. And
yeah,
of course, my response to something like that is if they were here to take over, it would be done already.
exactly. I agree. No, I'm disappointed in our government. We're a little too slow on the uptake when it comes to these things. I'm very pleased that they are starting to release some things, but they like to keep the population unbalanced, and they do that through fear. So it's easier to say, oh, but we got to think of national security and are they bad guys or good guys? All of that. No, just use a little logic, make your own decision. Appreciate the fact that the government is beginning to release things. I think that's wonderful. It's happening all over the world. So we're not the first. We're actually kind of long down the line towards the last of the
Mhm.
groups to release information,
Yeah.
but we're getting there.
Yeah.
So be happy with that, but realize there's so much out there and so many areas like you, Richard, with what you do and how your show provides people like me and all these other experiencers and authors a place to come to share their story. And people need to be supportive of that. And they need to not only support by listening, but when possible, financial support to keep you guys on the air so you can keep the public informed.
Well, and we put out that plea every single
Absolutely.
program to say, hey, look, if you would like to be a part of the work we're doing by supporting us financially, as I've said before, we have a PayPal account and my email address, richard@richarddugan.com. That's the one you send it to. I would encourage you folks also to go to britelders.com to find out more about UFO Contact from the Pleiades. It's volumes 1 and 2. Obviously, it
Good.
came out initially in 45 years ago in 2 separate books. Is that right?
Right.
And
Right.
you've
And
combined.
now it's one big book. It's 10 inches square. It's a coffee table book
Mhm.
full of beautiful photographs, 200 pages, a lot of information in it.
Mm. I would take it though that with the book in particular, not so much with the documentary, but with the book, there was some technology, modern technology utilized to really bring these photos, the photographs and images in the book out, so that they jump out at you in that respect.
You know what? It's the same technology we used when we did volume one originally. We decided, no, we're not going to rescan everything and all of
Okay.
that. We used the exact same thing we had.
Well, I know enough about the printing process because number one, my father was a printer.
Uh-huh.
He worked for a company in Arizona in Phoenix called Rocky Mountain Bank Note Company
Oh, yeah.
in the 60s and 70s.
Uh-huh.
And I remember he took me on a tour of the place once as a little kid, and he knew how to typeset, which
Yes.
I learned in high school in a club. It was called VICA, Vocational Industrial Clubs
Right.
of America, where we learned how to put the characters, and you had to learn how to read not just backwards, but upside down.
Upside down. Yes.
And of course he printed checks. Back then
Uh-huh.
they printed them and you had those big metal sheets and they would wrap around the drum and you'd have different ink. And
Yeah.
at that time he told me, he says, oh yeah, and there's a special ink we use. It's a magnetic or magnetized ink that the numbers across the bottom, the account and routing numbers are printed with.
Right.
So that when it's run through whatever machine the retailer runs it through even back then, it could read the numbers and know that
Hmm.
that's the account. So
Yeah,
to
we
me
used
that's
a
amazing.
four-color offset press.
Oh wow.
Yeah, so that's going back, and Tom Welch and I would be up in the middle of the night watching the sheets come off because it was all four colors, so you had to balance the colors as they came together.
Right.
And matching it, make certain there's no edge off just a hair because it makes the whole photograph blurry. And oh yeah, we
Oh,
were
I've seen newspaper when they started going to color pictures in the
yeah,
newspapers. For some reason they didn't fix it, and you
yeah,
could see that even the hair off. Yeah, the picture looked blurry.
yeah,
It's like, oh, I got to go see my doctor, get some new glasses.
yeah,
It's
exactly.
like, oh, it's the paper. Oh, thank God. Um, and it's to me the process is fascinating, and and actually it's a lot of fun. And of course, I delved into black and white photography. I took a semester in
Mhm.
college, had a blast with it. As a matter of fact, I had a blast. My brother did not because I turned our bedroom that we shared into a dark room. All right. I blacked out the windows
Uh-huh.
with the packaging material that they put the X-ray film in, and I was working for the VA at the time in the X-ray developing department. And
Hmm.
so I learned to run that stuff through the rollers and everything. And so I got to take that stuff home. So anyway, I blacked it out. I got the plastic. I made the big mistake of getting metal trays. You don't use metal trays when you're using the chemicals because it eats little holes.
It eats them, yeah.
Yeah, so I got plenty. But anyway, and I had an enlarger, and I
Mhm.
loved playing with that stuff. Oh my God. Uh, the old technology, I mean, I still wish that I had now I still own a reel-to-reel. I still own a splicing block, a China marker, splicing
Wow.
tape, and razor blades.
Wow.
And I got to tell you how much fun I used to have doing that. Now, I had the equivalent of undo back then because
Uh-huh.
when I would splice something out before I was completely finished, I would place it on top of the amplifier that had the meters in front. I would just place that on top in case when I went to play it, it wasn't quite right. And then when I was done, I would throw all that stuff away.
Oh,
That was my equivalent of undo. So the technology obviously has come a long way, but there's nothing like doing it the old fashioned way. To me, it's
right. Hands on.
oh, it's so much fun. I'm curious where now your business was in Phoenix. Whereabouts in Phoenix did you live back then?
Off 32nd Street in Indian School.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I see. I'm imagining 32nd Street and Indian School. We lived between McDowell and Thomas, 16th and 20th Streets.
Uh-huh.
Matter of fact, I still remember when we got the news that they were running the 51 up 20th Street,
Oh,
and we thought we
we
would
were
be
out of there by
oh,
then.
oh yeah, well, we weren't. But yeah, I just it was a beautiful town. I mean,
Yeah, it
I
was.
just I
I
can't.
grew up there. I
Yeah, I
loved
did. I was born and raised.
Me too.
And I am saddened for the kids who are growing up today. They cannot experience what you and I did as kids growing
Oh,
up.
the freedoms, man.
Oh,
We'd take off in the afternoon, go climb orange trees or the swamp cedars out in the back. I mean, we just had a great time.
I'd
Ride our
bicycle out to
bikes everywhere.
yeah.
There's too many people now.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'd ride a bicycle up to Squaw Peak, North
Yeah.
Mountain, Camelback Mountain. Never
Yeah.
climbed Camelback Mountain, but I did Squaw Peak many, many times.
Uh-huh.
I was bicycling all over the place from Glendale through Phoenix and
Yeah.
Scottsdale. I think I even went as far once as Tempe.
That's
Um,
all.
oh man, I was all over the place on a bicycle. And I was only involved in two accidents in all the years I bicycled.
Uh-huh.
And one of them was my fault because I was on the left-hand side of the road.
Oh, okay.
And I actually got slowly run over by a gentleman in a Toyota pickup truck with a camper shell. He had no idea that he had run over me, and he's
Oh,
gunning his engine because the bike was keeping the car from moving forward.
oh.
I get out from under the bicycle and I go knock on his window, and I nearly gave the guy a heart attack. Um, and then the only other accident was when I was going across Camelback on a 10-speed bike. And you know those drainage grids?
Yeah.
Why they put those grids parallel to the road, I'll never know, but I noticed it coming up. I turned my front wheel so as not to go head first into the drainage
Uh-huh.
thing, but my rear wheel got caught
Oh,
and it sent me ass over tea kettle off, fortunately to the right instead of to the left.
uh-huh.
Those were the only two incidents. But anyway, I love reminiscing. We had such a great time. It was such a beautiful place.
It was so freeing and it was it
Yeah.
was really a nice town, really centered and
Yeah.
helpful with each other. And when we would have giant floods, which we had every few years, I mean,
Especially in the 70s. Yeah.
everybody was back there helping. And yeah, it was
Yeah.
good.
It was wonderful. We had a neighborhood. I don't know about you, but in our neighborhood, there were no fences save 1 yard
Same
that
here.
had a
Yeah.
chain link fence in their front yard. So every other yard we could run through it. We'd go into the
Uh-huh.
alleys. You don't have alleys much anymore these days, you know?
Yeah.
But we would be running all over them. And we weren't a gang, but it was like the neighborhood knew that we would be out and playing, which I
Yeah.
have to believe they liked from the standpoint that at least the kids were outside instead of inside watching TV.
Right.
And there were occasions my mom would come into the living room and turn off the set and tell us to go out and play. And we
Oh,
did.
we were outdoors. The second homework was finished. We were out playing. I mean, whether
Oh,
it was
you actually did
skateboarding.
homework?
Oh yeah, whether it was skimboarding in the irrigation or, up in a tree somewhere or walking on somebody's back wall,
Yeah.
or in a pool.
I'm
Yeah,
curious. I'm
we were
curious in that regard. When you think back,
Mhm.
do you recall ever looking up in the sky and noticing anything
Yeah,
unusual?
I do. I do. We were sitting around the pool, the whole family, looking up, and it was in the middle of a meteor shower. And it was the first time I realized, oh my gosh, this is such an incredible place. I mean, we have beauty up there, we have beauty here. I had to be about 8 or 9 years old then. And I remember that so profoundly and wondering, what else is out there? Just curious, natural curiosity. So yeah, we're
Is
really fortunate. We have
i-
a beautiful place to live.
is that part of the reason why you got involved in this subject and in particular this story 45 years ago?
No, the story sort of landed in our laps. And because we had the investigative company we had and the abilities, the contacts we had, that's why we decided to, all right, take on the evidence and see what we could find. But my dad was literally a rocket engineer, worked with von Braun on the early missile systems. And he and the other engineers would get together and talk about the things they had seen. So in the back of my mind, I knew this stuff was there already. You know, when they're talking about sending a missile up that's going up and coming straight down, and there's something hovering, watching this happen, and they're sitting around the living room chatting about it. To
Mm.
me, that was normal. I grew up with that. So I had less of a problem than my husband in believing this was a possibility. Lee, on the other hand, had not had any type of interaction with something like this, and he just didn't believe it could be real. And
Mm.
then he saw the evidence, and that was the end of that question.
Yeah, now unfortunately today with the how do I put this? The mindset, I was going to use another word, but the mindset of many people today, they don't care what evidence you show them anymore. And this is now earthly material world evidence of whatever
Right,
subject you want. No, you're full of it. That's not real. That's been faked. It's photoshopped. It's whatever the software you want to throw out there.
right,
It's been manufactured. It's not real. And in fact, it's just as real as anything that you could ever imagine. And it doesn't seem to make any difference where it comes from because people are, I want to say, trapped in that mindset.
yeah. They're
This
closed.
Yeah, they're closed. And that's one of the reasons why I've always been um, a staunch opponent of the elimination of the fairness doctrine in broadcasting.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
think, and though it's
You got
taken
to hear
40
all
years,
sides.
so it's taken 40 years for it to really manifest, but now we're reaping the rewards, if you will, of the elimination of the fairness doctrine. And I've even talked with people on different sides of a
Uh,
subject, on different sides of the aisle. And I
yeah.
say, would you like to see the fairness doctrine come back? And they say, well, what's that? And
What's
I
that?
explain it to them, right? And so far, every one of them says, yeah. And it's like, well, then why don't you encourage people to use their common sense and start putting into practice the fairness doctrine in terms of what they're watching on social media and
Right.
on television and so forth. I, on the other hand, um, I try not to watch any of it, period.
Uh-huh.
You give me a subject and we'll talk about what my observations are, what my perspectives are. I
There
don't
you go.
hold a left perspective or a right perspective. What are we talking about? What's the subject? And with UFOs, I'm on the side of the people that have experienced it, more so because it has changed their lives. You mentioned someone from Arizona. What was his name? Travis, was it?
Travis Walton.
Travis
Yes.
Walton. It turned I mean, not to say that Meier's life wasn't turned upside
Right.
down, but Travis Walton, apparently there was something, and I think he went through hypnosis, wasn't it, to
Yes.
get to the root of what it really was that supposedly was blocked, and it was pretty
Mhm.
horrific from that standpoint, but it changed his life. He
It
was
did.
never the same.
That's right. You never are after an experience like that. And If I had one wish, it wouldn't just be the fairness doctrine, but it would be the fact that we open up communication with each other again, but not from the brain standpoint, from the heart standpoint. Be honest about what you're feeling. Be honest about what you believe your perception of things are. And then you can have a discussion. And it doesn't mean I'm right, you're wrong, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
It's about learning from each other. And we need to do that. We're not doing that anymore. We've dug our little foxholes, we've climbed into them, we've pulled the dirt right on top of our head. So, yeah. We need to be able to communicate, to exchange, to have different ideas and views. I can't grow if I don't listen to someone who holds opposing views from me or even varying views from me.
Yeah.
I'll learn from them and they can learn from me too if they're open. So it doesn't mean you're going to change my mind, but it expands my knowledge base. And
Exactly.
we need that desperately.
I mean, what was the phrase? I'm sure you remember this one that we were told on occasion by parents and teachers and elders and so forth. Why don't you go to the library, read a book, and broaden your horizons?
Exactly.
You know, and yet we have a mentality in this country today that wants to ban certain books. I don't know if
Yeah.
you know this or not. You remember when Kindle came out?
Yes. Yes.
Do you know the first book they banned from Kindle? Do you know what that was?
No.
It's a real irony, and I don't even know if they got it. Fahrenheit 451. Seriously, I kid you not.
Oh my.
Yeah.
Okay.
According to the information that I gleaned, that was the first book that they
Wow.
banned. And
Why?
then well, good question. Why? I don't know that there's a good answer for that. And then we have other people who want to change the language of, for example, the books of Mark Twain,
No, no, no.
the stories of Huck Finn and Tom Sawyer. That's the way they spoke in that era, number one.
Exactly.
And
As an author, as someone that writes and wants to communicate with people, let my words stand for what they are. If you disagree with them, bring it to me. Don't change the word. Don't presume to know what that word meant to me when I wrote it.
right. Well, I wish you would talk to a certain governor in a certain southern state.
Yeah, I think it's
that,
got a peninsula.
that's got a peninsula. We're not gonna
Right.
we're not gonna name the governor or the state, ladies and gentlemen, but it looks like a tail. Well, it looks
Yeah.
like other things too, but it looks like a tail. And because it's like I had this conversation with the Christian broadcaster, the general manager of the Christian station I worked for, when there was a move afoot to get Playboy removed from the Library of Congress publishing department in Braille. And
Oh,
of course,
please.
I worked for a radio reading service in Phoenix there in
Uh-huh.
in the early 80s when they first started. Then they, of course, put out all kinds of periodicals and the newspapers and so forth. And I said to him, I said, okay, let me put it to you this way. On the one hand, I would agree with you that if Hefner, the late Hugh Hefner, was willing to publish his magazine in Braille and make it available to the blind at a reduced subscription rate, and they don't put the pictures in Braille, okay?
Right.
Then I would be in perfect agreement with you. Let's eliminate it. However, the genie's already out of the bottle. The government's already publishing it in Braille. And
Yeah.
what you are saying to the blind and visually impaired who read that magazine seriously for the articles, I'm going to tell you what you can and cannot read. And yet
Exactly.
you can go into any library or a bookstore. You can, based upon the color of the book, the font they're
Right.
using, the thickness of the book, the texture of the pages, the print inside, etc., etc., etc. You can decide, I'm going to read it. No, I'm not going to read it. But you're going to tell them what they can and can't read.
That's just so wrong.
Now,
They forget what
go
our
ahead.
Constitution says.
Yeah.
I mean, this country is founded on a basis of law and
Mm-hmm.
rule, and
Yeah.
we need to respect that. We don't go changing it because at the moment we decide we don't like one aspect of it. We have to look at it in the big picture. And these ideas of just removing certain aspects from society, whether it's an old statue from way back at the Civil War, it had a purpose then. The words of Mark Twain had a purpose then. Rather than just pretend they didn't exist, do the opposite. Find out what it meant to those people.
Yeah.
Learn about it. Don't just shut it out and pretend it's not there. It's a part of our history.
Yeah.
Know about it.
I
Yeah.
think another aspect too that I'm perplexed by is the concept, as I see it, the concept of judging someone based upon their race.
Right.
Now, I have often wanted to get somebody to give me a list of grievances that they have, for example, against the Jews. And I know one of them has to do with the alleged Jewish control of the media and the entertainment industry. And I say, let me give you a different perspective on that. Instead of being upset over the alleged control by the Jewish community of the media industry, they should actually be praised for the fact that they were able to do it. And you and your alleged race weren't. They should be given the credit, just like the blacks in Oklahoma on Black Wall
Absolutely.
Street should be given all of the credit in the world for creating such a magnificent economic structure
Yes.
for themselves.
Yes.
They should be
Absolutely.
praised and hell awarded. Okay. And so on and so forth. And that's to me the perspective that we need to start taking a look at instead of, I love the example of Einstein, who was in a classroom and he says, he was kind of doing a little test. 9 times 1, and he's writing it on the board, is 9, and 9 times 2 is 18. And he got all the way up. 9 times 9 is 81. 9 times 10 is 93. And the classroom went nuts.
Uh-huh.
And he said, it turns around and he says, basically, I paraphrase, it's rather fascinating that I was able to get 9 of the answers correct and nobody said a word. But as soon as I made a mistake on the 10th, you jumped all over me.
Beautiful.
And it's like, we all, and I by the way, I'm one who does not believe in success or failure. I believe in learning life lessons or
Right.
learning experiences. And
Well, that's the success, is the life lesson itself.
yeah.
Yeah.
I heard something just earlier today on a radio program, country station I listened to out of Nashville. It's syndicated. And they were talking about what was it? Something to do with failure is the key to success. Something along those lines.
Uh-huh.
That without it, you will never succeed.
I agree.
And just trying to pass that on. I'm curious in some of what we've just talked about, and I'm sure this came up in the years that Meier was talking to the Pleiadians, that conversations probably more about his government than ours.
Yeah.
But in terms of the way that we as human beings have chosen in many different sectors of the planet to govern ourselves, that there had to have been conversations to that regard. Are you familiar? Are you aware of any of those? In
Yeah, a
terms of,
few of them.
yeah.
They did talk a lot about their side of the planet over there in Europe. But they talked about the Pleiadians too, and how they govern, and how it's not a socialist society as some people would think, but that they help each other. They have a barter system. And if something needs to be done here, you trade services, things like that.
Mm-hmm.
They take care of each other, but then they're telepathic too. So they have that ability to know when someone is going through a trauma or something like that. They take care of each other. We've forgotten how to do that.
I'm
And
curious.
that's the biggest thing that I saw is differences in cultures.
I'm curious as to whether the Pleiadians core,
Mhm.
as most countries on this planet's core, if their core is their economy, because every time I turn around and I hear different stories about what's going on,
Yeah.
we've got to make sure that our economy is strong because that's the backbone. And it's like, really? You really believe that our economy is the backbone?
Yeah.
It's like, oh,
No, their economy is not their backbone. The thing that is their backbone is the caring for each other, which they look at as part of going back to our earlier discussion, creation. So that's a part of you. You're caring for yourself
yeah.
as you care for someone else. And
It-
it's really about just lifting everybody up. Not saying everybody is equal and has to be identical and they get the same amount of food, water, money, whatever. No, because they all move in different directions. Some have an affinity towards space travel, some have an affinity towards farming, different things, but they help each other.
yeah.
And they don't look at one as being superior to the other. They do have an equality base in that way. Each job has a very special purpose
Mm-hmm.
and needs to be held in the same esteem as anything else. Whereas we tend to put it on a sliding scale, okay, well, you're down here, you're a farmer, and okay, you're up here, you're a politician. That's not right. It
Yeah.
needs to be equal. We need to respect what each does.
I've often thought of the sanitation engineer,
Yeah.
garbage man, if you want to call them that. Um, I'm always here in Santa Barbara as I come across them from time to time. I always compliment them and thank them for
Yeah.
the work they do. Because if it weren't for them, we'd be up to our eyeballs.
Yes.
So thank you
As New
very much.
York has experienced sometimes.
I can only
Yeah.
imagine, and that's all I want to do is imagine.
Yeah.
This has been a fascinating. I would take it that much of the Pleiadian philosophy is intertwined in the context of this 45th anniversary book.
Yes, in both the book and in the documentary. Yeah.
And the
So the
documentary
philosophy gets a flow in there. Yes.
and the documentary will be available on what date? I know you said late May.
Late May, we're crossing our fingers for May 30th.
All right,
It's
right
at the
around
duplicator now. Yeah.
Memorial Day, right around Memorial Day,
Yes.
I think. Yeah.
Yes.
Well, wonderful. I will. I'm actually going to watch it again as long as the link is available. I'm going to watch it again and just kind of glean a little bit more. Maybe if I can sit and watch it for a longer period of time.
Oh, that'd be good.
Yeah, and
There's a
thank
lot
you.
in there, a
Yeah,
lot of information that couldn't go into the books.
right. Well, I thank you so much for giving us such an abundance of time on this
Oh, thank
program
you.
again. And I look forward to also maybe talking down the road about other areas that you are working on as well.
Very good. I look forward to it, Richard. I enjoy my time with you.
Well, thank you. I enjoy my time with you as well. And I enjoy my time with you folks. So thank you for listening to and watching Tell Me Your Story. New paradigms for a new world. We're giving you choices and knowledge of those choices to help make your dreams come true. And until our next broadcast, podcast, video cast, yes, all three, love to Lal. Jeanette, I am still listening. Dad, continue to be happy because I am. Smokey, I'll see you on the other side. And to my dear friend Zorro, aho, aho.
Mm.